Okay, so good morning. It's been a while since I've been on a stream. Took a little break over the last few weeks from YouTube. A lot has happened in the last 3-4 weeks since I last was online doing a live stream. Obviously, the Six Nations has been completed. Wales won, which was a surprise. If I'm honest, when I was previewing the tournament, I felt that Wales still had some issues to resolve, and it looks like Wayne Pibak has finally found a way to shore up that defence. And uh, going forward in attack, they look more fluid now than what they did last year. Obviously, coaching changes sometimes take a little bit of time to bed in. Ireland in the Six Nations were hit and miss, same as Scotland. And France obviously were heavily disrupted by the outbreak of coronavirus within their camp, which I think possibly helped Wales win the title. England were, well, disappointing. I'm not sure if Eddie Jones is the right guy to lead them into the next World Cup. Plain and simple. There are some concerns with England that have been highlighted, and their penalty count yet again is far too high if you are going to have sustained success. How this team got to the World Cup final in 2019, in the space of a year and a half, they've gone backwards, not forwards. You could argue the Saracens situation, where they're now playing in the Championship, is having an effect. I argued that last year. How much of an effect would the Saracens salary cap scandal and their subsequent relegation have on England? I think that's been proven through. I think they need to have some fresh faces in that lineup, get them some game time, and refresh the lineup. I think that the penalty count is, as I say, far too high for a team to have sustained success. Plain and simple. Scotland's good and bad. Again, inconsistency. They're brilliant one game, terrible the next. As I say with the French, I think they were undone by the outbreak of coronavirus within their camp. There is no doubting on that. That's heavily disrupted their tournament. So if I'm being honest, I think Ireland are in a rebuilding phase now. I think you can clearly see post Jonathan Sexton there are some depth issues there. There are going to have to be some fresh faces brought in. Yes, they won a fair few games, but there are some issues with their attack. There's some issues with their style of play and how the game has evolved. In other news, the first female jockey has won the Grand National. We've had some close calls in the past. That in itself, I think, is a good thing for the sport of national hunt horse racing. There is no doubt on that. I think that could be a catalyst for more women to get into the sport as well at the top level. And of course, Richard Thornton, obviously, retiring. Richard Johnson, retiring a week before the Grand National as the second most successful jockey of all time behind AP McCoy. So there's changes in horse racing with some of the old guard retiring and some of the new guard coming through. This is a sport that has actually been under the spotlight over a fair few cases of drug fails on recreational drug use, high profile cases in that regard, and jockey welfare. There's been a few high-profile suicides within the sport. So the sport is under the spotlight, but a positive story coming out of it is the first female jockey to win the Grand National, something that hasn't happened for quite ever before, and that could be a catalyst in years going forward. In the NHL, it's trade deadline day today, so in the next few hours, expect there to be a lot of movement with GMs as America and Canada wake up. Expect there to be a lot of movement from about, I would say, 4 or 5 o'clock our time UK onwards throughout the day. There could be a lot of teams making trades. There's been a fair few trades in the last few days building up to the trade deadline point, and there's only 4 weeks of the regular season left. Now, the Vancouver Canucks are currently in protocol. They've got to play a lot of games in a very short space of time. Montreal as well are playing catch up because they also went into a quarantine. So the NHL hasn't shut down its league when teams have outbreaks, but now we've had 2 outbreaks north of the border in Canada, which has disrupted the North Division and skewed it somewhat. So the top 3 teams are going to be in the playoffs. That's Toronto, Winnipeg, and Edmonton. But the Canadians and the Canucks are chasing down or being well. The Canadians are above Calgary. The Canucks will have lots of games in hand. It'll be very, very interesting to see what transpires there. Very, very interesting how that delays the start of the playoffs, whether they start the playoffs at the scheduled time, and then the Canadian teams have to play catch up. It'll be very interesting to see what happens and how the NHL organises that. In the NRL, some teams are having a very difficult start to the season. The Canterbury Bulldogs were expected to, obviously, with new players bedding in and a new coach and Trent Barrett, were expected to, take a little while to get used to the new tactics, formations, players. The Broncos are still having a disastrous time. One win. The Cowboys have had one win. The Manly Sea Eagles have had a disastrous start to the season. One win. There are some teams really having a shocking start to the season, considering with coaching changes and player moves. The Sea Eagles, their depth issues are plain for all to see. Brisbane, there's still issues within that team. Yes, they beat the Bulldogs, but that is what it is. And the Cowboys, they finally get a win, but there's still massive issues with their defence. There's massive issues with their attack. And yeah, I mean, they are conceding a lot of points. Michael Morgan retiring, Jake Friend retiring as well. That's another thing. A couple of retirements due to injury concerns, and concussion is still at the forefront. We now have the 18th man rule, which was brought in following Cronulla having like 4 players done in the first half, 3 with concussion, no interchange bench against Parramatta. The NRL have had a knee-jerk reaction. They've experimented with further rule changes this year with the 6 again rule. The game is the same pace it was last year. Injuries though, Jake Friend, that's 3 concussions in 6 games. He announced his retirement. Following day, Michael Morgan, his shoulder has had it. It's falling apart. He's announced his retirement. Both of them have won grand finals. Both have played Origin. These are top quality players, and that's leaving a massive leadership void for both the Roosters and the Cowboys. And also, I would say, I wouldn't say a selection headache for Australia when it comes to the World Cup at the end of the year, but they would have been in the reckoning had they been fully fit, had they been on form to be selected. So there is that. The COVID situation in Australia, there was an outbreak in Brisbane, in the Greater Brisbane area, which meant that a few NRL games were moved to Sydney or New South Wales. All games went ahead as planned this weekend. No games have been called off. As things currently stand, no players have had positive tests at all since the resumption of play in May last year. As far as I know, New South Wales has full stadium capacity. State of Victoria and Queensland have still reduced capacities, but they're still above 50%, 60s. I think it depends on the location, but it's up to 75% capacity. So in that regard, the situation is far better in Australia than it is in Europe. The UK is not doing too bad at the moment. So we'll have to wait and see on that. I'm still waiting for my first vaccine shot. Got to organise that. But as things currently stand, Australia and New Zealand are doing far, far better with things than Europe. Europe's in an absolute mess. Mainland Europe. With regards to the Rugby League World Cup, will it go ahead as planned, with or without fans? Well, the organisers have stated that to delay another year would be not catastrophic, but not beneficial to the sport. They've made these announcements well before Christmas and into the build-up this year. They've said that they have several contingency plans that they're already on the public record. Plan 1 is to have full attendance. Plan 2 is to have reduced attendance. Plan 3 is to have no attendance. And Plan 4 is to move it to next year. If there's full attendance, the government still gives some financial grants to rugby league in this country. With reduced attendance, that grant goes up. With no attendance, the grant gets even bigger, and if it's delayed to next year, that's where things get a bit difficult. The organisers have said that is a Hail Mary play. They don't want to go to that length. As far as I know, they are still banking on having full attendance. Some venues have changed since they were announced on the announcement date. But as things are standing right now, They have contingency plans in place. They've already had a loan from the government. There is secondary funds going to be funneled into the sport. So as things stand, mark your calendars in October. The Rugby League World Cup is going ahead as planned. The Euros, however, is far more interesting with with the state of things in Europe, with the vaccine rollout being slow and vaccine shortages. So when it comes to the Euros tennis, the Euros football, sorry, and to be fair, the French tennis Open and Wimbledon. I wouldn't say I don't enjoy rugby without crowds. I think what Australia proved with the resumption of play is they played without fans for several rounds. Then they brought fans in limited capacities, and by the end of the season, they were at 50% capacity. State of Origin got up to 75% capacity, and then this season started similar regulations in place, limited capacities. As things progressed, New South Wales opened up to 100% capacity a couple of rounds ago, and Queensland and Victoria are still on reduced capacities, but more than last season. So the situation with Australia, at least, is positive. They're talking about a travel corridor with New Zealand because the Warriors are indefinitely in Australia. However, they're looking at allowing the New Zealand Warriors to go back to Mount Smart Stadium in Auckland at some point. The earliest would be round 7. That was the initial plan in the off season. Was they would play at least the first 7 rounds in Australia, in New South Wales on the Central Coast, and then relocate back home to New Zealand partway through the season. That is still on course. We'll have to wait and see whether that goes ahead. That's up to national governments to then organise that. And there will be obviously quarantine rules and bubbles put in place. Now, New Zealand's already had full capacity in stadiums since last year. Just look at the Super Rugby, look at cricket. New Zealand's already had full capacity for a while. Yes, I'm aware that what was the semi-professional league is now fully professional in North America. Much like Major League Rugby, the North American Rugby League has also decided to go fully professional. I think it's a long overdue decision. I think there is some good quality rugby league played in North America. Obviously, they brought in massively to the NRL when it resumed, and the AFL, because they were the first 2 professional leagues to resume play. They were the first 2 professional leagues to get fans in stadiums. So Australia and New Zealand have led the way in regards to resumption of play. North America has been a shambles itself. Most of the teams are on the East Coast. They're in Canada and the US. There was a semi-professional league structure already in place before COVID. I haven't read too much into it. I haven't looked in depth. But with the amount of Pacific Islanders who live in the US and Canada, and the amount of Australian and New Zealand expats who also live in North America, it's already got a good foundation. And the Americans massively bought into the NRL and the AFL last summer when North American sport was on hold. Some leagues didn't resume play. Leagues that should be concerned by this will be mostly the CFL. The CFL didn't have a season last year, didn't get any games played at all. And there are concerns that the CFL, with the XFL proposed merger, the CFL, I think, is still technically recovering from its expansion in the US 20 years ago, which financially ruined the league. Let's just put that out there. Damaged the league massively, couldn't compete. The CFL is one of those sports leagues that could be adversely affected by rugby league in the US and Canada. Major League Rugby as well could be nicking fans of the CFL. They managed to get some games played last season. They've started this season. They've got games played. So in that regard, the CFL is one of those leagues that is in deep, deep trouble. It was in deep trouble before COVID. I did a video on the state of the CFL. It was not looking good before the pandemic. It's looking even weaker now. The fact that the XFL have decided to go into talks to merge, there is concerns that the structure of the league and the product of the league will change. It needs to find revenue streams to survive. The TV deal that it had is not great. Most players have second jobs in the off season. The salary cap is low. Before COVID, when I did a CFL video, which is on the channel, It's up there when I break down the numbers. The salary cap is less than I think the average contract of the NFL. So um, the CFL does have problems. If it does go bust, that's 9 teams that go out of business, and that's a lot of players who will be without a team, basically, and out of work. So the CFL has had some financial issues for a long time. I think 5 of the teams run out a loss or barely break even. There's hardly any profit in the league. Um, and with the state of lockdown measures in Canada right now, it would be very, very difficult to play with no fans. That's hence why they decided to suspend the season. Without fans in attendance, the league loses money, all teams lose money, and it becomes ruinous. Uh, Interestingly enough, the Euros, and this is what we're talking about, will the World Cup go ahead? I think the Rugby League World Cup will go ahead as planned. In regards to the Euros, there's still question marks whether it will go ahead. There's talks about trying to put it in one host country, the UK possibly being one of those hosts that they're leaning towards because of the vaccine rollout that we have in place and because of our I wouldn't say COVID's gone away, but the rapidly dropping infection rate, the uptick in community vaccination, antibody tests. I mean, yes, the UK government got things horribly wrong last year. There is no denying that. But other countries in Europe are now overtaking for infection rate. The situation in Europe is a mess, and that does affect a pan-European tournament like the Euros, which was the plan that UEFA brought in to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the first Euro tournament back in 1960. Was a pan-European tournament. That, I think sports fans in general, especially football fans, are getting very frustrated with the direction the sport is taking. The format changes to the Champions League. Not the European Super League idea that still hasn't gone away, but it's on the back burner. Fans are getting more and more frustrated with, I think, the way the sport is governed and the way that it benefits very few clubs and very few individuals. The average ticket price, if you look across Europe, pre-COVID was going up. Now that we've had this pandemic and the economic downturn that's going to come with it, and the economic recovery, people are going to feel less money in their pocket, and it's a difficult one to juggle. I think we've already seen other tournaments moved and rescheduled, and I think we'll see what happens. Yes, another professional American Football League. This will be the third attempt that American footballers had going professional. The previous 2 attempts failed for a reason. In Europe, it sucked. It hemorrhaged money, massively bled money. And you're going against established sports such as football, rugby union, ice hockey, and in France and the England Rugby League as well. You're going against established team sports that already have pretty loyal fan bases, that have good TV deals that are already in place, and good other media streaming deals as well online as well. This is where I think the NFL and have got things wrong. NFL Europe was a disaster, was an absolute shambles, and most of the teams were based in Germany. It failed before; it will probably fail again. I wouldn't be surprised if, yes, it gets started up. A lot of the CFL players see a chance to make some money and keep playing, and those players that didn't get drafted from college give it a go. But the quality level will not be of the standard that American football fans will expect. And yeah, you've got a lot of US personnel, Army, Navy, and Air Force personnel based in Europe, across Europe. And I don't know. I think Germany, it's football and then ice hockey in Germany. In France, it's rugby league and rugby union are actually more popular than football. But again, you've got established leagues that have TV deals in place, fan bases that have been loyal for decades, if not a century. It's going to be very difficult to break into the market there. And then you've got other sports like basketball, handball. That's very popular in Europe. Basketball is very popular in Europe, predominantly because of the Olympic programs that a lot of the former Eastern Bloc countries had, and the fact that there are a lot of US personnel based in places like Italy and Germany They've got pretty solid professional leagues there. Scandinavia, ice hockey is the thing, but then you've got things like bandy, which is a sport. You've got roller hockey in Spain and Portugal, which is professional and well supported and has a decent TV deal as well. It's going to be very, very difficult, I think. This is why American football has failed before, is you've already got these established sports that have been there for, well, forever, basically, with established clubs, established league structures, established governance, fan bases, very community-centric fan bases as well on the continent when it comes to clubs. It's going to be an interesting one to see how successful the third attempt, because there was a British league as well at American football that didn't last very, very long either. And this is the interesting thing. They're arguing about having a team in London or in Europe with the NFL. There's been the debate about, having an NFL team in London or Berlin or Paris, Italy, and there isn't. And the NFL stated when it started its London series that they wanted a team in London 5 years ago. Oh, yeah. The NFL, on its planning sheet, wanted to have a team already in London long before Wembley was attempted to be sold by Greg Clark to Sahid Khan. I can't see it happening now, and I can't see, I can't see it working. But it is very expensive to run an American football team. Look at the CFL and look at the struggles they have with 4 out of the 9 teams making a loss. Look at the fact that the XFL and the AAF have both failed. And the XFL are in merger talks with the CFL to try and resurrect one or both of those leagues. Look at the NFL when it takes the games to London, how much it actually costs to rent Wembley or rent White Hart Lane or Twickenham for those games. The amount of money that it's cost. Tottenham obviously rebuilt their stadium to get NFL games on a massive contract. Yeah, COVID sort of damaged that. And I don't think the NFL going to London or Mexico, because the players are actually very much against playing in Mexico and relocating a team outside the US. I don't see it happening. On the side of the top 5 leagues across Europe, PSG are losing their dominance in France. Lille are giving them a damn good run for their money. In regards to Juve, their dominance, I think, is starting to wane. Bayern, the league in Germany is very competitive. Bayern's gap at the top is not as big as what it used to be. And I can see a change in German football. Man City, look, Liverpool having such a poor title defence, Man United, Leicester, and Chelsea sniffing around the European places, West Ham having a good run this season. It's a rebalancing. Man City are still not the Man City that broke records a couple of seasons ago with back-to-back Premier League titles. That's not the case anymore. I think they've been aided by the fact that Liverpool have not been great this season. Is it a one-off? Has COVID caught up to them? All the extra games that have been played, the Champions League and things like that. It'll be interesting. I can't see Man City winning every season. Chelsea have had lots of money as well. They don't win every season. Look where Arsenal have fallen off to. Man United haven't won the league in 7 years. These are other wealthy teams that have money. Leicester obviously getting a title in that and still being a top 4 team. The Big Six is not is a misnomer in its entirety. It's due to wealth, not titles. Tottenham haven't won anything. Their class is one of the Big Six. That is a joke. So if this European Super League comes along, you've got teams like Tottenham who've won sod all since 2008 in there. They can't win a trophy. So the competitors of the top 5, I think there is starting to be a shift in direction of the competitiveness. There are some teams breaking into those top European places that weren't there last year. There is a market correction, so to speak. And I think Leicester or Southampton could win the FA Cup this year. They get a gateway into Europe. That then changes things up. That mixes things up. Chelsea, Man City is going to be a very interesting semi-final. I think Chelsea have the tools to frustrate City and knock them out. Whether Leicester. I think Leicester and Southampton probably beat Chelsea in the final. This is why I wanted a Leicester Southampton final rather than a semi-final. I think it'd be better for the sport in England. But I think across the board, I think fans are getting a bit frustrated with how football is run. Personally, on the NFL and the NBA when they bring games overseas to London, the NHL have done it for years. They last came over to London to the UK in 2007. The NHL started doing that in the 30s. What is really interesting with the North American leagues coming over is still no professional team in any of those leagues, and the NBA being more profitable, actually, ironically, and cheaper to run than the NFL. The Boston Celtics CEO was interviewed a couple of years ago. This is again pre-COVID, and this was to do with the attempted sale of Wembley to Sahid Khan, the big talk about relocating an NFL franchise to London in 2018, 2019. And he was interviewed, and he bluntly put it, and this is true, bluntly put it, not going to happen. No major league franchise will leave the US and Canada and go over to Europe to have a team. Not happening. The NHL had a thought about having a 10 team league in Europe in ice hockey, which hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. They may draft our best players and take our best players out of Europe and plonk them in the US and Canada. It doesn't mean it's going to work going the other way. The NHL does take games on the road to Europe. I think with these major leagues doing that, I think that might be on the back burner for a couple of years until the COVID situation settles down. I think it has cost them a lot of money not having these games overseas, but it's the cost of hosting. Ice hockey in America are a very expensive sport to run, and as a fan of ice hockey, I can tell you it's a very expensive sport to run. I've seen so many teams in Europe have financial difficulties. Even in US and Canada, there are teams with financial difficulties in the NHL right now. I mean, the ECHL, some teams didn't return to play this season. The AHL, shortened season, again, they're having issues with contracts. It is interesting when you have the NFL games in London or the NHL games going across Europe. They don't just focus on one country. They do cherry pick the countries. They go around. They've done, I think, they've been to the UK in a pre-season. They've been to Czech Republic. They've been to Slovakia. They've been to Finland. They've been to Sweden. They've been to Germany. They've been to Switzerland. You will see in the crowd every single jersey is being worn. Local teams and NHL teams, AHL, ECHL. You will see fans of all the teams that play in North America. I mean, even at regular season games over here in the UK, you will go into the crowd and you will see jerseys from the North American leagues, European leagues, British leagues. So yes, there is fans of a sport. The NFL, you look at the London series games, even the teams that aren't playing, the fans are turning up in their jerseys. The fact they've gone with the Jacksonville Jaguars was a hint that Sahid Khan wanted to move the team over, but I can't see the NFLPA voting off on that. Having 8 regular season games in London with the time difference, the TV networks will rip their hair out because they have to readjust scheduling and the viewership figures may not be the best over in America. There'll be a later start for games here, and then the transport network. The London Tube system and the British Rail network is not 24-hour across the board. There's a few night trains that go between London and Scotland. There's a few night trains that go between London and the continent of the Eurostar. The tube system, a percentage of the lines have a night service. It's a reduced service. Bus services, there's not a full night bus service in London. You've got to figure that in. If you want to have a later start for the US audience, London's going to be a nightmare transport-wise unless the UK transport network goes to a 24-hour network, which is not going to happen with the trade unions. It's not going to happen unless there is massive investment in employment and, to me, it's not likely to happen. On the third tier European Cup, bring back the Cup Winners' Cup. That's all they had to do. They decided not to do that. They scrapped that, and I think that is a mistake. When they restructured the Champions League to have group stages and they restructured the UEFA Cup, they missed a trick when they got rid of the Cup Winners' Cup. They did. And you notice in the domestic cup competitions, some cup competitions have gone, like League Cups in France, for example. And some of the teams field weakened sides for cup competitions, don't take them as seriously, and it devalues the competition. And fan numbers before COVID at the FA Cup were dropping season on season. The League Cup constantly restructured, again, fan numbers dropping season upon season. So it, and then you have coaches arguing about, fixture congestion. Go back to a straight knockout format in the Champions League. Go back to a straight knockout format in the Europa League and bring back the Cup Winners' Cup. You get rid of that fixture congestion. UEFA have chased the money. So you have these group stage games that mean nothing with teams where they're playing dead rubbers. And that does nothing for the product when you've got two teams who are just going through the motions, because one team's already knocked out or going into the Europa League. The other team have already qualified for the next round, the knockout stages, and they just go through the motions. They field different sides. You just got two teams that aren't really going hammer and tong 110%. They're 75%. It's a slow-paced game, and it's not very entertaining to watch. And I've watched a lot of Champions League and Europa League and Cup Winners' Cup football in my lifetime. Football tactics. I think the 4-3-3 still has a place, but it doesn't matter. You could have 5 at the back, you could have 4 at the back, 3 at the back, 5 in midfield, you could have 3 up front, 1 up front. Each style of football suits the players you have and the coach you have. To me, it's all about what the coach wants to get out of his team and the tools he has to his disposal. It doesn't bother me what tactics we have. You could have a team that's designed for the counter-attack, a team designed for possession football, a team designed for fast-paced possession football, a team that's there just to disrupt play in the midfield and make the game scrappy. It's all about winning. It doesn't matter if you have a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 or a 5-3 whatever, or ow, my hand. It doesn't matter if you've got 1 up front or 2 up front. A 4-4-2 still useful. It all depends on the style of play that you want to play. And sometimes you'll have 3 different formations for the same tie, in one game. You've got to be flexible in your tactics. You can't be very rigid. This is where a 4-4-2 as a starting lineup, you can make adjustments and make it a 4-3-1 or whatever, or a 4-3-1-1 or whatever you want to do. You have a diamond formation, you have a deep lying midfielder, you could have... I think the 4-3-3 for me is the more exciting counter-attack style, but I've seen teams play with 5 or 6 at the back, really defensive, absorb the pressure, and then when the opposition are getting frustrated because the play keeps breaking down in that final third, that 6 at the back suddenly becomes 4 because the 2 wing backs push forward, and it's all about adjusting your formation throughout play. This is where football becomes really, you get bogged down in the tactical discussions between managers and teams, and you look at the lineups and how they've set themselves up, and sometimes formations cancel each other out. The 4-3-3 works best from counter-attack. A 5 midfield means you want to break down the play in midfield and congest the midfield and stifle the attack of the opposition, which could mean a more defensive lineup. 5 at the back or 6 at the back, you really are going for a defensive lineup. And of course, the sweeper position is basically died to death. A couple of teams still play an honorary sweeper position where you have a deep line midfielder who will also become a deep lying centre back, depending on where the ball is in play and how the team are playing. And the sweeper keeper has taken away some of that sweeper, but you still have the occasional sweeper roving around the deep midfield and behind the back 4 or back 5, sweeping up things, protecting the goalkeeper basically, which means you can't play the offside trap. So some of these formations are designed for the offside trap, others are designed where you just mitigate that and you have that deep lying player, sort of like a David Luiz. I would say David Luiz would be better suited being a sweeper than a centre back, but at the end of the day, modern football has done away with that position, even though I think it's actually a position that more teams should utilise, where you have that deep defensive midfielder who can spring attacks from picking up the ball at the back and going through the centre backs and providing that third centre back whilst dropping back in defence but going forward in attack to add that extra player in midfield. That's what the sweeper is all about. I think more teams should utilise it, and there are players out there who are playing right now who are playing as deep line midfielders or centre backs who could actually suit a sweeper role where they can ping long passes and sweep up attacks, break down attacks in that final third, and then go on those long mazy runs where they go forward. I think certain players are suited to that role, but coaches are determined not to use it. It means you have an extra body at the back, and it actually means extra protection for the goalkeeper. It means that ball through is less likely to be the ball over top of the attacker going through. Having a sweeper, actually gives extra protection to your back four, but it does mean that you lose a player in midfield, which means you would have to have a centre forward just by themselves up front. But again, there are players who can play that role. I remember the sweeper being very, very popular in the 90s. Very, very popular with a lot of teams using a sweeper, deep lying midfielder, deep lying spare centre back, basically, who had more pace than the other two centre backs, so could cover breaks. But that seems to have died a death. It may make a return, where you've got the feed 4-2-3-1. I don't like that formation. It gets overly technical, and I think can break down the play. I think just in defence, you want to have your formation. In attack, you want to have your creative players going. And if that means playing total football like the Dutch did in the 70s to a reasonable success, especially in club football with Ajax, so be it. It means you can have a role for that sweeper player who then adds an extra midfielder. And then when he runs into midfield, you then have more creative players pushing up the field. I like the sweeper role. I used to play it at school, actually. My coach used to go nuts, but I used to actually drop off, and then the offside trap wouldn't work, and then you've got a quicker player sweeping up balls over the top, protecting the goalkeeper, meaning the goalkeeper has to do a bit less work. The goalkeeper is less exposed to that through ball where he has to come out, and then you mitigate the penalty where the goalkeeper's come out and the player goes over. It mitigates the goalkeeper being rounded, going around the goalkeeper, charging out and leaving the net exposed. And if that does happen, you've got the sweeper on the line to clear things. I think on UEFA wanting to get like a Europa League format for women's football, again, you need to have the fan base. And while people go, women's football sucks, it doesn't suck. It just is not getting the right style of promotion. I think they're going about it the wrong way by trying to force feed the product. Let the product develop. Let the product develop. The game is going more professional, which is good. Recent tournaments have had pretty decent quality play, but women's football needs to progress naturally and not be force-fed, because I think that's what's harming it rather than helping it. And UEFA and FIFA, to a certain extent, I think need to be wary of how they're promoting it. I think they're going about it the wrong way. Well, I do actually enjoy women's football. I find it very entertaining, very open, very even. And while the US have been exceptionally successful, there are flaws with that, because the game in the US is not professional. The professional leagues are in Europe. That's where the game is developing its best. Is in Europe, and we're now seeing female officials refereeing men's games, and that can only be a positive. Only be a positive. I mean, I enjoyed the Women's World Cup 2 years ago. I really did. I found it a really enjoyable watch, a fun tournament to watch. And yeah, there was some blowout scores in a couple of games, but overall it was actually quite entertaining. Yeah, the quality level isn't the same, but you would have the same quality level in non-league football, at the lower levels of non-league football. It's still entertaining to watch when you've got players not afraid to tackle, players, putting effort and energy in. When sometimes in the men's game, especially in the top leagues, you'll have teams just going through the motions, especially in the European competitions, because of the dead rubbers, which I don't like. I mean, if I was in football administration, I would definitely consider going back to a straight knockout tournament. It would mean the big teams have to put their best teams out. They can't just, put a couple of youngsters and a couple of squad players in there, rotate. They would be forced to play a solid side. Best national team in what sport? That is an interesting one. I couldn't tell you the best national team right now. Having watched pieces of the two qualifiers against Albania and Poland, I was not impressed with England. Even though they won both games, they're set up for the counter-attack. Now, Poland would have been a good side to counter-attack against, because they were some good players. Albania was set up to defend and frustrate and strangle the midfield, which they did. England in possession, slow and methodical and plodding. And while I like Pope as a goalkeeper, he's not a sweeper keeper. So stop passing the ball back to him, expecting him to be silky smooth with his play from the back. This obsession with the sweeper keeper is frustrating. If your goalkeeper is naturally like a Manuel Neuer or an Alisson, then yeah, use that in your tactics. If your goalkeeper is Pope or Heaton, if you get a back pass to him, he's going to leather it into row Z. That's what you expect. You expect the back pass to him to be a defensive clearance, not to start play. Throwing the ball out there, great. But I'm not sure on the best national team right now because of the disrupted year we've had and a delayed tournament, and you're trying to, play a tournament a year behind and get qualifiers in. It's really, I'm not a big fan of the Nations League. At the same time, that does benefit the smaller nations, but then you get nations qualifying for tournaments who shouldn't be there, who will get slaughtered. So it's a debating point. Do you want to? I'm not sold on the best football national team. When it comes to rugby union, I still think the Northern Hemisphere is lagging behind the Southern Hemisphere. I think South Africa, we'll see what happens in the Lions tour. There's a reason why they won the World Cup. New Zealand, they've lost some games. New Zealand are human. They're going through a transition phase with players retiring and changes to the lineup. Australia are in a mess. I think South Africa and New Zealand are the best in the Southern Hemisphere. Argentina are thereabouts as well. Don't count out Japan to have a good program in place. The US have massively improved. Major League Rugby is a beneficial, benefited them. On the side of do I see women managing in men's professional teams? In some sports, they already are. In some sports, you already have women in managerial roles. I think in Major League Baseball or the NBA, there's already a couple of female GMs in baseball and the NBA. There's already women in front office and back office positions in the NHL. You've got at various levels, women involved in the coaching setup. When it comes to football or soccer, if you are in the US, I will mention that, or Canada. There is an issue in the US at the moment. There's a very big dividing point between the left and the right. That is already there. There's a big problem with the left and the right. The feminists want everything, and the conservatives want things to stay as they are. We'll see what happens in regards to the US on women managing men's professional teams. It's already happening. I think ice hockey's had a couple. I know there's a few GM roles, general manager roles in the US in Major League Baseball and NBA that have been filled by women. There's obviously a debate around men coaching women as well. Should it be female coaches coaching women and male coaches coaching men? But we've seen chief sporting directors of cycling teams and international sports programs when it comes to the Olympics be women. I think it should go to the right candidate, not because of their gender. I honestly think that it will happen in time. I think, we need to let women's sports develop in their own right. We've seen issues where fans aren't turning up. The women's NBA has to get funding from the men's NBA to survive. And they break even, they make a small profit. I couldn't name you a single women NBA player. I couldn't. And it's not because they're not talented and they're not supreme athletes. They are. I just couldn't name you one. Women's ice hockey, I know a couple of high profile players, but that's because it's my favourite sport. Women's league and union, I think Australia's got it right with the Women's Rugby League. I think Women's Rugby Union, I think England and France have, and I think Italy have got it right as well. I think there's the Six Nations when it comes to Women's Rugby Union, they've got it right. It's a good quality watch, actually. The Women's Six Nations, I do thoroughly enjoy it. I think they've got that right. I think they've definitely massively improved there. Women's football, I think that's the one they're really the governing bodies are pushing too much. I think you need to start at grassroots level in any sport, and that's where you got your wins are. When it comes to the Rugby League World Cup, really interesting. I can see Tonga being the dark horse. There's been obviously discussions about the England setup with Wayne Bennett when he left, and Sean Wayne coming in. He was linked to the Broncos job. Very interesting. A lot more English players. English players are going over to the NRL. Big debate. Big debate. I can see Australia not necessarily winning, but New Zealand, they have a pretty solid side, if I'm honest. But they underperformed in recent years. So it's an open tournament between the big 4-5 nations, very open tournament. I can see Australia being challenged this year. Whether they actually can retain their title is a different thing, but they've had a lot of players who have retired. Um, in and Cameron Smith going, obviously he retired naturally on his own terms. Jake Friend and Michael Morgan going, they are blows if you are a selector, and if they were to have good seasons. But Jake Friend and Michael Morgan, injuries done for them. Boyd Cordner, Australia captain, he won't be playing till at least round 12. So that's another 6-7 weeks that he's not playing. And so, honestly, I'm not sure what's going to happen in this Rugby League World Cup. It all depends on how things go with the NRL and the Super League. If the Super League has any stoppages again, any issues that could prove problematic. Oh, fucking Ash, Jesus. And we've still got a long way to go with the seasons. The NRL is obviously ahead when it comes to playing. They've started earlier. They've got more games under their belt. But injuries are already taking a toll on players. There are some players out for the season who won't be fit in time for the World Cup for whatever nation they represent. It's going to be interesting. I'm going to leave it as that. I'm going to say it's going to be interesting. And yeah, 3.5 years ago, I did say Tonga were my dark horses for the World Cup in 2017. They still are my dark horses for 2021. I think there were some players who switched allegiance from Australia and New Zealand to Tonga, which has strengthened their squad, and they've beaten Australia last year. So Tonga are dangerous. They're in form. They're dangerous. They have a good setup now, laced with star players. And don't discount Fiji with Ravalawa and Mika Sivo on the wings. Do not discount Fiji either. They've got some good players. And Papua New Guinea, they're going to take a lot of confidence from beating Great Britain over last winter. They've got some good players currently playing in the NRL as well. So Fiji, Tonga and PNG are going to be dangerous. Whether PNG can win games away from home is another thing, because they did very well in the World Cup playing in Port Moresby. You take them out Port Moresby, they lose. So it's whether PNG can win games outside Papua New Guinea, but they've got some good players. They're going to be very dangerous. Samoa, on the other hand, I'm disappointed with Samoa. They've taken backward steps. There's issues with their governing body. There's issues with the rugby union as well. So there's issues with Samoa financially. But you look at it, and you look at what players are available for selection for Tonga. Jesus Christ, that is an all-star side they can put out. They can put out pretty much, if you put that side out as a club team, they could win the minor premiership. And I'm not joking. If they get things right and they get their tactics right and their skill set and keep and their set completion, they could be dangerous. And I still think they are the dark horses. But until squads are announced, you just don't know. Until the season, both in the NRL and the Super League, is done, again, it's up in the air because players can get injured, players will retire because of injury. That is something that's happened quite recently, obviously, with the NRL. Player fitness, whether they're fit enough, whether they're in form. Until the squads are actually fully announced, because we've got State of Origin yet, which is going to be a ding-dong, I think, back at its normal slot mid-season. And the Queensland sides, the Titans are playing well. The Cowboys and the Broncos are having disastrous seasons. Again, it's going to be interesting. Yes, Queensland won at the end of last season, but having State of Origin at the end of the season, it was needs must. It wasn't necessary. It was necessary. Going back to the normal slot, I think will give us a fair indication of where New South Wales and Queensland are and where the Australian selectors are. Do I think VAR should be improved if at all? Yes, absolutely, massively. Um, it's been an absolute shambles. Plain and simple. I've seen a few games with VAR in the FA Cup. I haven't watched many league games. VAR, the amount of controversy around it seems to have died down a little bit in recent weeks, but the last 2 seasons has been nothing short of shambolic. I constantly reiterate the 2018 World Cup in Russia and how they basically got the foundations right for VAR with the improvements needed. What they've done is they've taken a backward step. They've rewritten the handball rule, accidental and deliberate. I think ball strikes hand, similar to a foot foul in the NBA or a hand pass in ice hockey, where you're not meant to do that. Possession goes to the other team, but there's no, unless it's deliberate, there shouldn't be any booking. It's just free kick or penalty to the other side. Same with the NBA with the foot foul, the hand pass in ice hockey. No actual, I think, if it's accidental, you take the wording out and it's just possession to the other team. It's like a knock on in rugby. The other team has the benefit of feeding their own scrum. Kicking the ball dead in rugby league, changeover. Simple rules like that, where it's just possession goes to the other team, or the chance of possession goes to the other team with a scrum in rugby league and rugby union for knock-ons. They need to look at the offside. I think it needs to be clear gap, rather than just having an arm. You can't control the ball with your arm. That should be discounted from offside completely. And if you're starting to use lines on a pitch, therefore, that's just a pain in the arse. Also, I think the referee should be fully mic'd up throughout the entire game for every decision. You hear it in rugby union, you have it in rugby league, you'll hear the referee on the mic. We'll notice the foul and abusive language in rugby league and rugby union is a lot less when it comes to officials. Players get heavily suspended and fined for abusing officials. They can be sent from the field for either 10 minutes or a red card. We've seen it happen to Dylan Hartley when he was playing for Northampton Saints. He made a comment towards Wayne Barnes. Now, I don't like Wayne Barnes as a referee. I'm not a big fan of Wayne Barnes as a referee. I've been very critical of Wayne Barnes as a referee in rugby union for years. But when Dylan Hartley called him an effing cheat, fucking cheat, he got a 6-week suspension and a massive fine and was sent from the field straight away. We've seen it last season with Adam Fanua-Blake. When he was playing for Manly, he said something to the referee of a similar line, and he copped a suspension and was sent from the field. Therefore, if the football referees are fully mic'd up, it will pick up abusive language between players, because we've had a few incidents where there's supposed racism with the Rangers, Slavia Prague, Europa League knockout stage game. And you can pick that up. And therefore, it will, I think, stop the dissent from players to referees. It will stop the crowding around the referees. And it will cut out a lot of the niggle, I think. And players will start behaving a lot better. You would see a lot less incidents of dissent, for example. You take that out of the game. That's something I would like. But then the fans know in the stadium and at home what's going on when the referee's going to a video assistant referee. That needs to happen. Fully mic up the refs. They need to look at how they're calling offsides. Your arm cannot be offside. You can't handle the ball unless you're a goalkeeper in the box or you're taking a throw in. So that automatically should be discounted. If your leg is offside, well, I think there needs to be a clear gap. Go back to there needs to be a clear space between the attacker and the defender. You get rid of that grey area. We've got to put lines on a pitch. Oh, his toes offside. I mean, come on. Some of the decisions are ridiculous. And you've got to look at the body position of players as well. If the defender's in full flight and the attacker is turning, the defender is easily going to cover that. I'm not going to lie, the defender is easily going to cover that. And if then the offside flag goes up, but the opposition team have already got the ball back, wave play on. Just get rid of the offside rule's a mess. The handball rule's a mess. Just make it handball. Get rid of accidental deliberate. Just an accidental handball in the area, by the way, is meant to be an indirect free kick. Putting that out there, it's still in the rulebook. If you accidentally handle the ball in the area, it's an indirect free kick, not a penalty. Yet referees keep going for the penalty spot. In my view, bring back the indirect free kick. We rarely see it. It's so fun when you've got 11 players, including the goalkeeper, on the line defending the indirect free kick. It's hilarious. because it becomes a scramble and it's kind of fun to watch. If the indirect free kick rule is still in the rule book, use it. So therefore, if you're going to continue with accidental and deliberate handball, if it's accidental handball in the box, it's an indirect free kick to the attacking side. If the defender's the one who's handling it, if it's the attacker handling it, it's just a free kick. But if the indirect free kick rule is still there, use it. I don't think it should be the torso. Not at all. If they're calling the arm offside, it should be the torso. I think it should be clear gap between attacker and defender. And then you also have to look at, is the defender at full flight and is the attacker turning? The attacker's turning and hasn't started running, but the defender's at full chat. The defender's going to overtake that guy. He loses his advantage. But I've actually got a book of football for beginners, which I got in the early 90s. So the back pass rule was actually still a thing until 92. So it still has the back pass in there where the keeper could pick it up. Yeah, that rule changed about 30 years ago. But other than that, it basically says if you pull on the shirt, that's a yellow card, straight up, straight away yellow. A pull on the shirt is a booking. That's hardly ever done. Handball, if it's accidental, is indirect free kick, and that rule has not changed. It has not changed. It's still in the rule book. And then you have to go, okay, and then it creates. Referees are very scared to give indirect free kicks. I don't know why. They have to give the penalty. They feel pressurised by the players to give a penalty. This is where, if the referee is mic'd up and you have an accidental handball in the box by the defender, it becomes an indirect free kick, which is hilarious to watch. And it's actually quite entertaining how teams defend that. Because you've got to be on the goal line if you're closer than 10 metres. If you're less closer than 10 metres, if you're, let's say you're right on the edge of the 18-yard box, they still have to form a wall right in front of the goalkeeper. And you normally get all 11 players just forming a line on the goal line. And it makes it really interesting because then they have to charge out. When the ball is touched past the other player, they just charge out like what I call the Hadrian's Wall formation. And it's really interesting because then you get a ping pong around the box. And because you've got all 11 players in the box, it means that if the play breaks down and it's still in play, it's a very congested box. You've got to have movement. And that's where these skillful players who like moving and jostling players and some of the big bulky players, you then can get a penalty out of that or a free kick. That is direct. But it's in the rule book. So I say referees need to be stronger on that. But if you mic them up, it stops the players crowding around demanding a penalty or demanding a free kick. The referee can then go, right, it's accidental. That's my decision. Go away. And then VAR will probably back up. Oh, is the harm in a natural position? It's like, no, just you can see it's accidental. If he swings his arm at the ball, then that's deliberate. If his arm is balanced, he's got to balance himself. He's not intentionally swung his arm or hand at the ball. It's accidental. Indirect free kick. Please. We used to see loads of them in the 90s. Not so much now. I've seen one or two, but it's so rare. It's ridiculous. Also, a back pass to the keeper if the keeper then picks the ball up is an indirect free kick as well, not a penalty, which again, you rarely see. Jamaica and Greece having, most of their players are either already UK based playing in various levels of the Super League Structure Championship and League One. And if they're Greek players, they're predominantly Australian. Again, they could be playing in the NRL and reserve grades and regional grades. So they're already on the radar, a lot of them. Same with Lebanon, the last World Cup. A lot of them already were NRL players or in NRL elite squads. So their players are already in the systems. It's just getting them that exposure and then growing the games domestically. Greece, it's going to be interesting with the state of the Greek economy, but you can then broadcast that on the national broadcasters in Greece and Jamaica, and then suddenly you go, oh, we weren't aware we played this sport. And I think the Jamaicans will definitely like rugby league with their closest to America, with a lot of players of Jamaican descent playing in the NFL, some Jamaican descent players playing in ice hockey. They will like the contact sport. It will be something different for the Jamaican sports fan base. And they're a sports mad country, Jamaica. For a population their size, they've got so many Olympians. It is, but it isn't. You could argue the same for Lebanon. Some of the Lebanese players were born in Lebanon, but have obviously been brought up in Australia. You could say it's a bit of a joke, but it's the grandfather rule. It's the grandparent rule. It's the parent rule. It's the only way the sport is going to develop. It is the only way the sport is going to develop. You have to have origins in Greece or Lebanon or Jamaica to play. And you've got the Windrush generation, whose kids and grandkids either will play for Jamaica. You've got the Lebanese from the Civil War, who went over to Australia in large numbers. There's about 400,000 Lebanese in Australia, mostly in Sydney, a fair few in Queensland, and some in Victoria, who went over to Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane to restart their lives with nothing. Hazem El Masri is possibly the best example. Robbie Farah is another good one. You've got a handful of the West Tigers. There are some pretty. Mitch Moses at Parramatta. Benny Elias, his uncle, he was born in Lebanon. He was born in Tripoli in Lebanon. Mitch Moses, his nephew, his parents were born in Lebanon, or one of his parents was born in Lebanon. So you do have a big Lebanese community in Australia, quite a sizable Lebanese community in Australia, quite a sizable Syrian community in Australia as well. So, yeah, you could say it's a bit of a joke, but at the same time, there is rugby union in Greece. There is actually a Greek national side. They're not very good. Rugby union is played in Greece, all amateur level, of course. Football is the national sport in Greece. That's the problem. You have to try and compete with a very established Athens-based professional sports league, which is football. You have got some very passionate fan bases when it comes to football in Greece. But no, Greece, I think there's a lot of Greek expats around the world, and there's enough of them to form a Greek national side. You can say it's a joke or not. There's a fair few Greeks who are currently in the NRL system, whose parents or grandparents were Greek, who or themselves were born in Greece and have emigrated. There's a massive Greek population in Australia, and fair play to them for qualifying. It's been a hard slog to get them qualified, but fair play for them to qualify. And it's only for the benefit of the sport. It's like Portugal when they qualified in 2007 for the Rugby Union World Cup, benefited the sport because the Sevens program was pretty good in Portugal, and they have actually got some decent players coming through. Spain have qualified for Rugby Union World Cups. Yeah, basketball is an interesting one, partly because of the Olympic programs that were in place during the Cold War. A lot of government funding was put into sport across Europe during the Cold War, both East and West, communist and capitalist. A lot of funding went in, and it's good TV deals, good media coverage, loyal fan bases, and then you've got a lot of US personnel who are based across Europe, and some Canadian personnel as well. And of course, they play basketball in their spare time. They shoot some hoop, and a lot of them are married. Local people settle down when they retire from the forces. They stay in Europe. You look at the US men's football team. I think it was the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. I think half the team either played their club football in Germany or were half German, partly because of their parents being based over there, meeting a local man or woman, going through the German club systems. They bilingual. This is where international sport gets really interesting now because it's such a global thing with globalization. In theory, I could play internationally for Ireland if I really wanted to, but I don't want to. In theory, but it is what it is. But yeah, basketball is very popular in Greece. It's very popular across Europe as a recreational sport, and as professional basketball leagues, very popular in Europe. Partly to do, as I say, with the communist governments of Eastern Europe and the Olympic programs of Western Europe catching up, because when it came to the Olympics, apart from the US, it would be the communist teams that always won the medals, and that got frustrating. So they pumped a lot of money into the education systems. And yeah, basketball is very, very popular. There's a lot of professional basketball leagues across Europe. What do I think of Israel Folau trying to get back into the NRL? That's an interesting one. Obviously, the Dragons were very interesting in trying to sign him. That fell through. They don't really need him right now, to be fair. Israel Folau is an interesting case in point. When it comes to the NRL, other players have done far much more serious things and have been allowed to return to play. I think Todd Carney's the best example of a player really misbehaving and still had a career in the Super League and the NRL, and eventually he was an idiot one time too many and his career was done. But if we're going by precedent, I think Israel Folau it's the battle between left and right. It's the battle between freedom of speech and hate speech and all that. And social media hasn't helped the situation. This is 10 years ago. He's already back playing. Um, but I think the Israel Folau situation, it's dragged on for the best part of, well, the whole history of the channel, basically. Best part of 3 years now. Um, it's an interesting case. There's no doubt he's a supreme athlete. He's one of the best dual code players we've ever seen, save maybe Sonny Bill Williams. Um, it's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. You've got to balance the pros and cons. It will bring media interest to the sport. A lot of it negative, a lot of it positive, and the NRL have to balance up whether the negative interest is going to harm their product, which they're trying to improve, and they're trying to improve off-field player discipline. They're trying to improve the image of the sport, where it's family orientated and inclusive. And in that case, you're excluding someone on religious grounds, which becomes a legal minefield. I think clubs have to be serious to sign him. No movement's happened yet. It's a World Cup year. He's obviously played at Catalan with no issues, so he's clearly fit. He's willing to go. Salary cap constraints will be interesting, but he's a free agent, so we'll see what happens. But when the Dragons were interested in signing him, the social media reaction was very split, and there was a lot of fans saying we'll cancel our membership if our club signs him, and that was across the board. All 16 teams were like, we will cancel. Fans were saying we will cancel our membership or our season tickets, or we will boycott while he plays. And I think with the financial situation the game finds itself in, with a flat salary cap for a couple of years, trying to recoup the losses of last year, it's a financial risk a lot of clubs just cannot afford right now. While we could argue he'll be a superstar player, he's now in his 30s. As we saw Sonny Bill Williams last year with the Roosters, it didn't really work. The difference is Folau's had a full season of rugby league under his belt with Catalan. He played very well over in the Super League when play resumed. He had a good season. It's an interesting one. Can he add value to your team? Has he been out of rugby league in the NRL especially too long? He's only had one season back since he's been with the Wallabies. I think with the situation where Todd Greenberg was ousted, Andrew Abdo and Volandis are now basically running the game with an iron fist, in the sense they got the sport resumed early, they got fans back in earlier than anyone else, they completed the season with no games postponed, they got State of Origin played. We'll see. I think, look, Israel Folau is going to create interest. But there are other players as well who've done far worse who've been allowed back. So the NRL, you could argue that was the Todd Greenberg era. This is the Andrew Abdo, Peter Volandis era with administration. They're going about things differently. They've obviously got to weigh up the pros and cons of Israel Folau and whether he would it would work. But I think, there was how much money would Israel Folau command? There is a salary cap constraints in place. Some teams are in financial trouble. Let's be clear on that. So it's a difficult one. I'm on the fence. I was critical of him when he first made the comments. Then the mess with Rugby Australia. Clubs will be looking at that going, Christ, if he misbehaves and he does something, we're going to get it in from the NRL. Catalan were told the same by the Super League. If he does anything on social media or has any controversy, you're in trouble. His contract is terminated. He won't get a payout. He signed up to that. He didn't take a knee in one game, which caused a little bit of for the BLM, which caused a little bit of some ruffled feathers. But with how political things in sport have gone in the last, I'm going to say 18 months, it is getting heated. There seems to be no dialogue between the left and the right anymore. There's no common sense prevailing for the most part. And oh my God, my hair's a mess. It's tough here. It's fucking tough. When we're looking at it though from the standpoint, he's still on social media. Is Israel Folau? He's been very quiet on social media in recent months. I think he's fully aware that if he wants to get back into rugby league in Australia, that's going to cause a big issue. Considering that Australia recently, obviously, a couple of years ago, voted for gay marriage and those and that topic and it, you're always going to have controversial players in any sport who divide opinion. Israel Folau, in the last, I'm going to say 3 years, is one of those players in a team sport who is dividing opinion. But then we had the anti-vaxxers like Bryce Cartwright last year, who almost, caused the league not to resume play because the NRL had to sign up to the health protocols that New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria governments put in place. And he was one, I think, 7 players who refused to get vaccinated. He sat out the whole season. He didn't play. He got sacked by his club. He got moved on. So it is getting a bit more politically charged with sport now, with sports having to go to governments for assistance with funding to cover financial issues, get loans. It's not as clean cut as Israel Folau's a religious bigot. And it has divided opinion on social media. It continues to divide social media opinion. But trial by social media or running policy by social media is no way to run any kind of policy, be it government policy, company policy, or sporting policy when it comes to governance. It's no way to do it. You're basically running policy by the mob. And we've seen a lot of high-profile incidents, racism, homophobia, sexism, across the globe. And it seems to be the policymakers are making policy on the back foot, on reaction. So it's interesting. I think if they exclude him, then it's double standards. But at the same time, they've got to protect their product. Plain and simple. They want to avoid further controversy, considering that rugby league is one of those sports. I mean, the Ben Barber video where he got fired by the North Queensland Cowboys was getting views today. That was 2 years ago. He was sacked by the Cowboys. He's another player who, he's had his controversy as well. He was not charged with any offence over the allegations of domestic violence, but was basically outcast out the game. Now, could you argue that the administrators, is there a hint of racism there? Because Jack de Belin hasn't been run out of the game. He's still allowed to train with the Dragons. He's just not allowed to play pending his trial. And his legal ramifications, I don't think Jack de Belin plays ever again. He might, but he's spent a good 2-3 years out of the game. But he's no stand down policy. But Ben Barber, not charged with an offence, is sacked on the spot and is thrown out the sport. So the NRL, this is the Todd Greenberg era. Now, Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo are still rebuilding confidence in the clubs and the fan base with the administration. The NRL was a bloated organisation. Money was being wasted by the NRL. The situation we find ourselves in, which is interesting, is they're trying to rebuild trust with club executives, fans, players. The Todd Greenberg era was scandal after scandal after scandal. Players are still misbehaving in the offseason. We've seen it again. There seems to be an issue, within the NRL of constant misbehaviour with players. A lot of it is to do with alcohol, but recreational drug use and steroid use is still there. The Brandon Sherry situation at Cronulla, for example, a club that's had its own scandal not that long ago with the peptides and the salary cap breaches, has again, caused concern. Jennings at Parramatta failing a drugs test. He's never going to play again. Bronson Sherry might. He's young enough. When he returns, he will still be early 20s. He's only a teenager, so he backdated ban. He's back in 3 years. The the Jack de Belin situation highlights the double standards that I think the NRL had under Tom Greenberg. Now, Abdo and Volandis are going by their standards, and they basically said, "We're this is the line in the sand. We're going from here." This is why they had discussions with the clubs, and they had discussions, obviously, eventually with Israel Folau saying clubs have to be serious to sign you. And it turns out no club is serious to sign him. The salary cap would, what would his salary be? It would be a problem. And yeah, a couple of players like Jake Friend and Michael Morgan have retired this season after playing games due to injury. But there's only limited cap relief that those clubs get. And they're not the same position as Israel Folau. So you would have to have someone go down in the centres or a fullback where there's not enough depth, where there's salary cap space at a club, and that's just not going to happen. It really isn't. And you've got those players who were meant to be playing reserve grade and the junior grades who didn't play last year, who are now getting game time. So it's an interesting debating point. The Jack de Belin situation, yeah, that's an issue that the Dragons are still reeling from with the salary cap. He's allowed to train but not allowed to play. So I don't know how that's clearly got to be a distraction behind the scenes. They're playing very well without him this season. But I don't think he plays again. He might, but I think it'd be highly doubtful. We know that he's already been on trial and one jury left without a verdict. I think it's August, I think is the next date in the calendar for the Jack de Belin legal scandal that's just continuing on and on and on and just hasn't not going anywhere. I am surprised the Dragons haven't terminated his contract. But I think with the policy that Todd Greenberg brought in when he was in charge of the NRL was the no fault, no stand down policy. It's a joke of a policy. It's a mess. There are other players as well who have also got legal issues, less high profile legal issues, but legal issues who are on the no fault, no stand down policy as things currently stand. But that policy was, again, reactionary to an off season of scandal where club officials, players were all misbehaving. During all the way up to when Jack de Belin was charged. I mean, Greg Inglis with his drink drive. It was negative headline after negative headline after negative headline, and it got to a point where it was a knee-jerk reaction by the NRL trying to protect their product. And while that policy is still in place, Abdo and Volandis have to stick by it until they can come up with a new policy. Bearing in mind, he hasn't been found guilty yet, and therefore the NRL and his club as his employers have a duty of care to their employee. And the players' unions are involved as well. It gets messy. It's dragged out. We see this time and time again in professional sport. And there are certain sports that seem to have more players having off-field legal problems and off-field indiscretions than others. There is a cultural thing as well. With when you talk about culture in sport, is what happens in the dressing room. What goes on. To me, personally, I do think there is a lads culture. I would think more of a drinking culture. Most of the interviews you see with ex-players, when they're on podcasts and on interviews, they do talk about having a few beers after. Tommy Raudonikis, for example, he passed away obviously last week. Most of the tales of Raudonikis are he's chain smoking and he's pissed because he was a heavy drinker and a heavy smoker, which obviously led to his various cancers that he had. Colourful character, but you look at some of the off-field dramas that involve players, like Jared Hayne. He's facing sentencing, alcohol involved in that. Jack de Belin, alcohol involved in that. There is definitely a drinking and somewhat of a casual drug culture within the NRL. You listen to any podcast or any interview with ex-players, like the Matty Johns podcast, there's some drinking tales with Paul Kent and Blocker Roach, where they discuss some of the antics that occurred. You look at Chad Townsend's got his own podcast. Bloke in a Bar, who's an ex Brisbane player. There's a lot of alcohol-related tales. Now, some of them are funny, but at the same time, there seems to be a heavy drinking culture. And somewhat of a drug use culture within the NRL. You look at Mitchell Pearce, you look at Todd Carney. These are two examples of drink-related incidents. Jake Friend had problems. Jack Whiten in his early days. Blake Ferguson. There are current and ex-players who've had indiscretions. Some have recently retired, others are still playing. And there needs to come a point where you go, really? Like, I'm thinking to myself, and it was a Toby Rudolph interview post-game, where in jest went, yeah, I'm going to go up northeast and have a few beers and pull a bird. That was all done in jest. He said, oh, well, that's obviously, in days past. We're a bit more professional now. I'm just going to go do a warm down and see me mum. But it was those comments of, I'm going to go to the bar, get shit-faced, pull a bird, go home, get up to some adult stuff, and then go back to training in the week. He got a bollocking from the NRL and was warned about his future interview conduct. Now, he was doing it tongue-in-cheek as a joke, because having seen him interviewed on other podcasts and by other interviewers, he comes down as a down-to-earth family guy who's very close to his family, came from a very humble background, and worked his way up to the NRL the hard way. Didn't think he was going to make it. And he got himself out of the gang culture. Now, there is clearly, the reaction on social media was like, the NRL have overreacted in this case. He's having a joke. He's relaxed. He's on the Matty Johns show, giving a post-match interview on a weekend. They've just won a key game. He's in good spirits, and he's having a jokey interview with a TV program that's known for pushing the boundaries and having a joke. Especially when you've got Matty Johns as the host, and you've got Nathan Hindmarsh as one of the guest presenters. There's going to be some tongue-in-cheek humour there because of the people on the program. But the NRL reacted, went bang, not acceptable, future con. I like seeing characters in sport who have that relaxed attitude where they open up and they have a sense of humour. Most of the time, we get these PR drilled droids who go, yeah, good game, bad game, played well, didn't play well, could do better here. And they're just dull. There is no humour in it. There is no personality in it. And they have been coached to the point, media coached to the point where they have had the lifeblood sucked out of them, and you can't get a relaxed interview. But I do agree there is a drinking culture in the NRL and the Super League. Zach Hardacre, drugs and alcohol with him, multiple incidents. He's not the only player. Multiple players have failed drugs tests for recreationals. It's not a new thing. I've been banging on about it for 4 years on the channel, because the channel's 4 years old on the 21st, by the way. Point out there. But there is a culture. Same in cricket. Same in rugby union with the whole Bath cocaine alcohol scandal with players, like multiple players were partying a bit too hard. And Matt Stevens was the player who was thrown under the bus there. Danny Cipriani, in his pre-season with Gloucester, punch up, assaulting a police officer, issues when he was in the Super Rugby in Australia. So there is clearly a drinking culture and a lads culture of a negative kind and a positive kind, because team bonding and get-togethers are and getting on with your teammates and bonding as a group is important in sport. But there is a negative culture there. We've heard stories about the NFL, multiple scandals in the NFL, multiple. Every off-season, you look at the NHL, there are tales coming out from ex-players of some really interesting party antics in the 80s and the 90s. Oh, yes. And they're still popping out with players failing drugs tests. Still, I was watching a documentary. Admittedly, it's a few years out of date, but I was watching it the other week. And steroid abuse in lower levels of rugby is endemic in Wales. In Wales, it is endemic. Half of the athletes who are currently serving drugs bans for recreationals or performance enhancers come from Wales in the UK. Half of them. Majority from rugby union and rugby league. Half of the athletes in the UK, that includes Scotland, Wales, England and Northern Ireland, half of them are from Wales. There is a massive issue, not just with steroids, but with a drink and drug culture. Now, that's a snapshot a few years back. I think it was done in 2015, that documentary, but it still resonates today that at the time, half of the rugby players of both codes, Welsh, I thought 2/3, and half of all athletes who are on drugs bans for recreationals and steroids, Welsh. And there's clearly a culture issue within Welsh Rugby Union, Rugby League at the lower levels, all the way up to the professional first grade, top flight. There's a problem there. And then you look at it as a snapshot and you're going, well, how many have failed on recreational drugs? And there's quite a few. It's not a new thing. There is clearly an issue there. And this is well before COVID, and it's still an issue now. Because players obviously didn't play a lot last season. A lot of the lower levels suspended play in a variety of sports, and they've got to keep fit somehow and keep their body shape up, keep their fitness up. They're going to be training by themselves, unsupervised, not by their teams, and they're going to bulk up quick. There's one way to do that. That's steroid. And then, if they're stood down because their league suspended play, but you can still have like a rule of 6 or whatever, regulations are in place with social distancing, they're going to party, they're going to drink, they're going to do drugs, they're going to get in trouble, which was proven with several players in football, at least, when all sport stopped this time last year and we had no sport going on in March and April and into May. High profile incidents with players misbehaving all over the place, mostly football. So I think there's a sporting culture that needs to change. How you go about that is up for discussion. Do you bring in a sports-wide or league-wide code of conducts that are fully transparent and the public can see and the players know about, the coaches know about? Do you bring in tougher penalties for recreational drug use, or do you have a 3-strike policy where you give them assistance, take them out of the lineup for a few weeks, you don't suspend them? Because it's well known that their players have been dropped because they're injured, aren't actually injured, they have other issues. Some players have been very public about their issues with drinking, drugs and gambling problems. Other players, it's more under the radar, hush hush. I mean, there needs to be some kind of cultural change. But the NRL does seem to have a major problem with alcohol-related problems and legal indiscretions with players every off-season. Every off-season, a player's getting arrested for some drink-related incident or being involved in a drink-related incident. So it's open for discussion about situations and things, but these discussions aren't going away. I think the pandemic has highlighted some of the issues within professional sport, away from the game, be it whatever sport it may be, some serious cultural issues within sport which desperately need addressing. So we'll see what happens. We will see what happens in that regard. I've done videos on it on player athlete welfare and assistance programs, and are they as advertised as well as they should be? Does the punishment meet the crime? Historical tales of athletes in locker rooms abusing recreational drugs and alcohol to excessive extent. High profile players who were thrown under the bus to protect the sport. There are a whole host of them. I mean, Bob Probert and Grant Fuhr in the NHL, for example, had drug problems and alcohol problems and were thrown under the bus. Whereas other players just got away with it because though they were classed as the high-profile targets, they got caught out with their legal indiscretions, and other players were like, "Oh, we've got away with it because they've got their man." There's clearly issues at foot. I haven't done any videos on Jarryd Hayne and about his legal problems, but he's done. He wanted to come back to the NRL. He tried. He was then a free agent. There were issues with his NFL time at the 49ers, legal problems off the field there as well. So this is an ongoing issue with him. There were rumours of legal issues over there that haven't gone away. Again, alcohol related. Again, a culture issue of a variety of things. But the NRL does need to clean its act up. There is no doubt on that. It's not the only professional sports league to have this problem. It won't be the last, but it's an ongoing thing. It is what it is. I mean, you follow the NRL, you'll see what's happened obviously with Tommy Raudonikis passing away. And the tales of Tommy Raudonikis is a lot of the funny ones involve alcohol. He liked to drink. Now, did that affect him on the field? Probably not. He was a heart and soul guy on the field. Didn't affect him as a coach either, but he was well known for knocking back a few beers every day, and being a bit of a character. At the same time, I think the NRL was still stuck in the 70s and 80s with its attitudes to the off-field indiscretions that players continually have. And that's within dressing rooms, that's within club organisations. I think under V'landys and Abdo, I think they're going to start really addressing this. I think Greenberg was reactionary and was a hopeless administrator. Hopeless. But I think with V'landys and Abdo, they've got some solid leadership at last, which can take a positive direction with the sport. But, it's I'm going to have to turn that light back on. It's too dark in here. But I think in regards to Jack de Belin, I don't think he plays again. If he is found innocent of the charges against him, I think his career is done. But I do believe there's a fair bit of legal doubt with his case. From what I've read and what the fact that the charges against his co-accused originally were dropped, says to me that the case is not as strong as the prosecutor wants it to be. But I don't think he plays again. If he does play again, that could prove again a headache for the NRL when it comes to its public image. There's going to be fans who are going to hurl abuse at Jack de Belin, and there's going to be Dragons fans who will be not very happy if he does return and go, yeah, I'm done with my membership. I don't want to support this team anymore. I'm turning my back on the game, which is something the NRL does not want because it's the fastest growing sport in Australia right now and one of the fastest growing leagues globally because of its return to play last year. They want to build on that strength and sell a TV deal overseas, get more eyes overseas watching the NRL. And I think the NRL are like, we don't want to lose our advantage over our domestic rivals in the AFL, and globally we can make a lot of money, which can be pumped back into the game because the clubs need it. But we'll see what happens. I mean, it's open for debate. I mean, the situation is the Jack de Belin situation is something I know a lot about because I've been following it since day one. It's a difficult one. Jared Hayne, obviously, I think his situation as well. It puts a lot of pressure on Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo to get the decision right if he does return to play, whether they go, right, you're re-registered, no full stand our policy. And if the Dragons go, right, you can play again. He may. I mean, Russell Packer, he broke a guy's skull. He got in a bar fight and basically left the guy with brain injuries and left him for dead in the street. Battered a guy. He served some time in prison. He played again. A similar length of time out of the game. He's still playing. So, harking back to Israel Folau's done no prison time and not been found guilty of any offence. So I can't see why the NRL would block him. But at the same time, new governance in the NRL now, new CEO, the whole situation politically with the NRL has changed since Israel Folau was last there. The governance has changed. So we're looking at a different landscape with the NRL now. I mean, if Russell Packer did what he did now, I don't think he plays again. But again, it's the leadership in charge of the organisation. I mean, today we've got NHL trade deadline day, and players can move all over the shop. We can have a lot of movement today in the NHL. but it's been a very active last couple of weeks. I mean, I haven't done a video for a while. I think it's about 4 weeks. I mean, I had my girlfriend over last weekend, so I didn't do any videos then. So yeah, I've been busy with other things, and it just basically means I take a bit of a break. I've actually enjoyed having a bit of a break from doing videos. I mean, the channel actually grew while I was off, not making videos. It's actually grown since I last did a video, which is nice. And yeah, I mean, the channel's going to be 4 years old in 9 days, so there will be a special live stream in 9 days' time. I mean, over the 4 years, we have had some very interesting discussions and some very interesting things happen. I mean, the sporting landscape has changed so much because when I started this channel up, it was just to subscribe to other. I mean, I started the channel up on my birthday in 2014 just to subscribe to other channels and just watch content. And then I decided to start doing videos. And my first video was on the 21st of April, 2017. And it wasn't a sports channel, it just developed into one. It was just me having a rant about crap. I was generally a bit, and I thought, sod it, I'll do a video vlog. And it turned out that when I was doing my video vlog, Neymar decided to get a transfer from Barcelona to PSG for stupid money. It's gone from there. So it was primarily football. And then the Rugby League World Cup came along, and I went, you know what? I like my rugby league. I'll follow the Rugby League World Cup. And I was actually kind of glad that I did. And Tonga playing as well as I did in that tournament really helped the channel grow massively. And it's gone from there, really. We've had some real big breaking sports stories like Mark Sampson getting sacked for bullying and racism claims. Well, he was initially in trouble for them, cleared up there, and then he got done for something else and he lost his job. Phil Neville becoming women's manager. Sam Allardyce getting the boot from England. The World Cup with Southgate as manager and getting to the semi-finals. So much has happened in 4 years that it amazes me that I'm A, still going, and B, it's just still a hobby. But having a break over the last month or so, I think, has done me good. I'm not fussed if the channel gets monetized. I mean, if it does, it's a bonus. It's just a hobby. I mean, I could do my Rugby League World Cup preview at some point. I think we're too far out to the preview because the squads haven't been announced. But it will be an interesting one. I am tempted to, because I've got a day off work. Normally I'm working, but I got a day off work because I've basically worked every weekend for like a month and I'm knackered. So my boss, but yeah, you can have a day off. It's sweet. So I'm enjoying my day off. I might do some content. You know, there's a lot going on. Sports wise, it is really interesting looking at sport over the last few weeks and having that step back. But no, if I was to go through the history of the channel, I mean, it started out as a personal video vlog, and then Neymar got transferred. Newcastle were under a tax investigation for fraud and bits and pieces. And then the Newcastle United story hasn't gone away because Mike Ashley still can't sell that club. You know, and I could look into will Mike Ashley ever sell Newcastle United. I think it's very likely to happen within the next 12 to 18 months. I can see Mike Ashley having no choice but to sell and take whatever offer is on the table. If they get relegated, that offer will be less money. If they stay up in the league, they're worth more. So the Newcastle United situation has followed the channel since day one. In the summer of 2017, they were under investigation over some transfers and some tax fraud stuff, and I just followed that, and I've been following it ever since. And Newcastle United have obviously been up for sale the entire time the channel has been going, which is really interesting. And the Newcastle United saga is never ending with his ownership. Eventually, he will sell up. It's a matter of when he sells up. I feel sorry for whatever manager's in charge. Doesn't matter if it's Benitez or Bruce. Um, the, the the whole thing has been badly run from day one since Mike Ashley's taken over. There's been a couple of relegations in there, lack of success, no European football really for a long time. Um, a fan base that will turn up every week. They will fill that stadium every week. It, you know, they were the second wealthiest club in English football 20 years ago, and now they're worth half as much in actual terms, not real terms. So the club has been massively devalued since their peak at 660 million, where they were valued at, I think, in 1999, at the turn of the century. 22 years later, they're worth 330 million. They've halved in value in actual. If you add inflation to that, in real terms, they're a third of the value of what they should be. So Newcastle United's an ongoing story. And the lack of the success is partly due to the ownership, both previous and current. And the managerial turnover is ridiculous. The players they've sold since Mike Ashley's owned the club stuns me. Absolutely stuns me, the players that have left the club. And some of the signings make me scratch my head. But it is what it is. It's a club that's been badly run for a very, very long time. And the owner wants to sell. And every time he gets close to selling it, they fall through for whatever reason. And that is frustrating. I think it's frustrating for Newcastle fans. I think it's frustrating for football in general. I think there needs to be a change in how the sport is run, how clubs are run, and the transparency of ownership and the transparency of club finances. We were told a couple of seasons ago we can let in fans for free. Turns out they can't. Turns out the clubs were blagging how wealthy they were, and actually the sport is run on catastrophic debt. And that situation ain't going to change. Football's debts have been exposed, and now that League One and League Two, there's no salary cap, which they wanted. The players' union have basically voted that down, and creates further problems. And they're trying to reduce squad sizes in the lower leagues, which is going to cause carnage with the fixture congestion. So the EFL and the PFA are at war with themselves yet again. It's just a mess. Football governance is an utter mess, and I don't see how it's going to change anytime soon. I really don't. Like, it stuns me how badly governed football is and has been for so long. So long. It's been badly governed. It's getting beyond laughable how badly governed football, not just nationally but globally, actually is. And the amount of debt in football is catastrophic. Barcelona is a prime example of that. And you take some of these super wealthy clubs, as standalone clubs, they would not survive. Football's finances are in a mess. Now, discussions about having salary caps in football are there. There's clearly a mood for it. But there's not a willingness to actually go, this is what we need to do. There is no action from governing bodies to go, we need to sort this out. No. There is absolutely no willingness to fix a problem that clearly needs fixing. And the clubs come back with their response, oh, we'll have a European Super League. We'll make sure the wealthy stay wealthy and the poor get screwed. And fans have gone, nah. So we've seen this before, where a rival league sets up and fails. It will fail, and catastrophically so. Clubs will go out of business. I'm surprised more football clubs haven't gone under. It really surprises me. Because when, like, at the start of the pandemic, we noticed all these sports saying that we're in trouble. financially. We are financially in trouble right now. We need government assistance. Um, Football was told, no, you're not getting any. And there's reasons for that. And rightly so, they shouldn't have got any. However, what has been exposed is how badly run professional sport is. Very badly run. And even though sports with salary caps are going, we are losing money. Salary caps are designed to reduce costs and protect clubs from going under. And even then, losing money. We've seen TV deals collapse. The French league has lost its TV deal. The TV deal collapsed last season. And that's going to have long-term impacts on the health of the sport in France. Football is not the most popular sport in France. It's not, which surprise many, but it's not. The NRL managed to argue a pretty solid TV deal for the resumption of play and for this season. They've mitigated some of their losses, but there are losses there, and they will continue to be there. They're not going away. Eventually, obviously, it will rebound, but in the short term, the salary cap's going to be flat. Same with the NHL, the NFL, the NBA. Major League Baseball doesn't have a salary cap. We nearly saw a player strike over the resumption of play last year. Major League Baseball is a sport I don't cover a lot on this channel, but it has got serious problems. So if you're a baseball fan, the health of baseball is not good. It's not as good as people think it should be. Baseball's in trouble. And the pandemic exposed the situation with baseball. It isn't not as much health as it would have you lead you to believe. Baseball has got problems. So yeah, we can argue, various things about, salary caps in sport and why European football hasn't got a salary cap and why it should have a salary cap and why it won't have a salary cap. There's not a willingness to do it. There's a handful of elite clubs that want to keep all the money for themselves. UEFA and FIFA have badly governed the sport for decades, and fans are the ones who are thought of last. And the pandemic exposed so many problems, so many problems. Other sports were lucky to get government assistance, very lucky. And even then, it's not enough. Even for the amateur sports and the grassroots level, community level, it's not enough. So we'll see what happens. Some of the questions, like what do I feel about international sport? Who's the best team in international, or best nation internationally? Depends on the sport. If we're looking at sport allowing political opinions in, that is a very slippery slope, which the Olympics and various other world championships have done before with boycotts and banning nations from competing. It is a slippery slope when you get to professional, non-political sport, when politics gets involved. It's been very divisive the last 18 months with the politics involved. It's very, very divisive. And so therefore, you're trading a slippery slope. So going back to Israel Folau, it's a slippery slope. Now, Super League allowed him back. There were some clubs that were against having him back. There were. But it went okay. The NRL would have been looking at that. I'm surprised it's been dragged out, but no clubs have shown interest. And it's because of salary cap. This is what happens when you have a salary cap. You have to balance your squad. Let's just check the headlines in sport. Let's see what's going on in sport right now. It'll be interesting to see what stories are breaking while we've been on live stream. Let's have a look at nationally in the UK, for example. We could look at Australia in a bit. Matsuyama, obviously, winning the Masters. Outsider. Now Son Heung-min. Tottenham wanted to determine the most effective action moving forward after Son Heung-min suffered a racist abuse on social media. He was abused following 3-1 defeat to Man United yesterday. Davinson Sanchez received racist messages on social media after a 2-2 draw against Newcastle. Another match day and more abhorrent racial abuse suffered by one of our players. It's the statement. This is again being reported to the platforms, and we should now undertake a full review alongside the Premier League to determine the most effective action moving forward. So social media again is the cesspit of humanity. Son, who scored for Tottenham in Sunday's defeat, was involved in an incident in which Manchester United had a goal disallowed after he was caught in the face by McTominay. They wanted social media platforms to take action after Sanchez was abused online. On Friday, a number of Premier League managers called for a football-wide boycott of social media in response to the increasing frequency of racist abuse of players. Scottish champions Rangers plus Championship clubs Swansea and Birmingham are boycotting social media for a week to combat abuse. Swansea took their decision of a short boycott with players Jamal Lowe, Ben Cabango and Jan de Handa having been racist abused on social media in the past 2 months. Rangers followed Swansea, where they also announced their players and staff would boycott social media for a week because of concerns about how platforms dealt with the racial abuse. Liverpool also said racist abuse on social media cannot be allowed to continue after Trent Alexander-Arnold, Naby Keita and Sadio Mane were also targeted. At the end of March, former Arsenal and France striker Thierry Henry said he was removing himself from social media because of racism and bullying across platforms. At the time, Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden said on Twitter that no one should have to switch off social media because of abuse. He added, social media firms must do more to tackle this, and we're introducing new laws to hold platforms to account. I would say fine them heavily. They'll start massively fine them. Massively. This is complex. We must get it right, but I'm absolutely determined to tackle it. Twitter said it's committed to Kick It Out initiative to tackle online hate and look forward to continuing these discussions and developing solutions with our partners in football. You're not doing much. Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, said it took action on 6.6 million pieces of hate speech between October and December last year and will take tougher action when we become aware of people breaking our rules in direct messages. That is interesting that, we're still having this debate. Right, okay. There's debate about should Harry Kane leave Spurs. Debate about Steve Bruce at Newcastle. Innsbruck and Turin to host David Cup finals with Madrid. So they're going to co-host tennis across 3 countries. Rangers are closing on an unbeaten season in Scotland. That'd be interesting. Oh, right. Leicester's Madison, Chowdhury and Perez were dropped for a COVID-19 breach. And Ireland versus France, the Women's Six Nations in doubt because of new quarantine rules. Nothing much is actually really happening. Solskjaer is pretty frustrated over that disallowed goal. Social media went nuts for that. And that's what I think Son's taken the abuse online. So nothing much is happening over in sport in the UK, although a judo coach has been arrested. So British Judo investigates coach arrests. British Judo is investigating a number of cases in which coaches have been arrested for sexual offences. Wow. Okay, that's not good. There's also a bullying investigation by British Judo. There was a safeguarding review in 2019, 2 years ago, by the way. Wow. There's a heavily redacted review. Oh dear. So yeah, British Judo is in trouble. And as a minority sport, again, when you're getting funding from UK sport over Olympic programs, that can affect funding if you have lots of negative headlines. Rumours about Harry Kane, first Japanese player to win the Masters, so nothing really happening in there. Let's have a look at the NRL. NRL news. Let's have a look at the NRL quickly. Gareth Widdock's been given an NRL offer, apparently. Let's have a look at the news. So, yeah, Gareth Widdock might be returning to the NRL, which I think suits his style of play over the Super League, personally. Lachlan Lewis might return for the Cowboys against the Bulldogs. Josh Maguire might be going to the Dragons, so if you follow the NRL, he might be leaving North Queensland. Raiders versus the Eels, Hodgson Scott, Racing, Clark Manson, watch continues. Not a lot. Lussick's out, Tamalolo, Farnworth out. There's not a lot really going on, apart from we are looking at Josh Maguire might be going to the St George Illawarra Dragons. Right, let's have a read about this, because this is just broken. Maguire set to seal the Dragons deal for immediate switch. Josh Maguire is set to agree an 18-month Dragons deal that could mean he dons the red and white as early as Sunday's clash with the Warriors. It is understood that North Queensland and St George Illawarra have agreed to the final terms of release for Maguire, deciding to be officially announced Tuesday. The former Queensland Origin and Australian Test forward has been the sights of his old Broncos coach Anthony Griffin for some time. Having weighed up a Dragons move over the summer before staying put in Townsville, his Dragon deal is set to run for the rest of this year and next season. It is also understood that the Cowboys will continue to pay a portion of his salary for this season. A reported swap deal with Dragons half Adam Clune will not take place, as the Cowboys in turn keep Jake Clifford, despite the Knights asking if he can be released early, given that he's going to Newcastle next year. Maguire's release, coupled with Michael Morgan's medical retirement last week, and where Maru Gregg's recent release to Parramatta frees up roster spots and the best part of $2 million in cap for next season. Maguire missed Sunday's breakthrough win over West Tigers, the first of Todd Payton's tenure, due to an infected elbow. He spent 36 hours in hospital last week with the cellulitis issue and did not travel to Sydney with the team, but is expected to be fit for round 6, potentially a Dragons debut on Sunday. Maguire's move continues Griffin's strong connection with players he has coached at Brisbane and Penrith. He joins Ben Hunt, Corey Norman, Andrew McCulloch, Tarek Sims, Cade Ellis, and Trent Merrin as current Dragons who have previously worked with Griffin. Maguire's move to join them closes the door, and Cronulla's Andrew Fafita doing the same after hearing the Dragons expressed interest in his switch recently. He's looking likely to be going to Wakefield Trinity Wildcats. He could be playing alongside his brother David. The Dragons have enjoyed a stark turnaround on the Griffin, setting a 4-1 start with beating Parramatta. So Josh Maguire could be on the way. That's an interesting one. If you're a Cronulla Sharks fan, John Morris' future is reportedly in doubt as the Cronulla Sharks, with the club looking at Craig Fitzgibbon for 2022. Michael Chammas and Jamie Soward break down the situation inside the NRL. Nothing interesting there.
Michael Chammas had in his Sydney Morning Herald article yesterday that John Morris is all but on the way out at the end of this year, with Craig Fitzgibbon, the Roosters assistant, agreeing to coach him next year. What's the latest?
That is interesting. That is very interesting. What is going on here? What is that all about? Thanks for subscribing. Cool. Yep. Yeah, so basically, John Morris could be out of his way at Cronulla. I think that's unfair, considering that the team he's got and its salary caps from previous coaches that he's got to deal with, including Shane Flanagan. And he's got to make the best. And he's had a decent start with them. He's got to finals 2 years in a row when he shouldn't have. He's got to work with the lineup. He's had nothing but issues. I think that's harsh on him. I think he's done a very good job with Cronulla. He's brought some players through. Is what it is. So, any further questions before I decide to wind this up? Because we've been online now for nearly 2 hours. It's been an interesting one. Not a lot of breaking news, really, apart from the British Judo and the social media companies being pressurised to tackle online abuse towards players. There's not a lot really going on in sport today. It's a bit of a quiet day on the sporting front, if I'm honest. All the weather's improved. It was snowing earlier, and now the snow has melted. Yeah, we had snow, quite heavy snow this morning. Brightened up, which is nice. But yeah, any further questions before I wind this up? Because it's been an interesting live stream. very, very interesting. Obviously, there's no real breaking stories at the moment. If Josh Maguire does get signed by the Dragons, that will be breaking news, and I will do a video on that. It'll be very interesting to see if he actually is fit to play on Sunday, because he's got an elbow infection. And it'd be interesting to see what happens with Morris at the Sharks as head coach, whether he stays or he goes. I think it's unfair on him. I think he will have a future in the NRL as a coach. He's done a pretty solid job with what he's got, and the situation he's had with Sherry failing his drugs test, and players not being fully fit, and, injury problems, and a depleted squad at times, and key players out. He's done pretty well, and he's got a pretty solid side there. So, any further questions? Any more questions? But yeah, obviously NHL trade deadline day as well today, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. There might be some big moves for some big name players swapping. It will get busier as the day goes on. I'm expecting it to be reasonably busy. Not as busy as previous seasons because of the pandemic and the 7-day quarantine if you're going to Canada and the US, but I do expect the NHL to have a reasonably busy trade deadline day. There's been some big moves made in recent days. Taylor Hall, for example, leaving Buffalo, having only signed there as a free agent at the beginning of the year. So it's going to be interesting. I think he goes to Boston. Gone to Boston. That's a big move. But yeah, any further questions? Alrighty then. Thank you very much, obviously, for all the questions and the conversation we've had. Obviously, I've taken a little break, but I'm back. I wouldn't expect me to post videos every single day. I think at the moment I'll be just posting every now and then. But it is the channel's 4th birthday in 9 days, so keep your eyes peeled for a live stream in 9 days' time. And I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.